today I'm going to be breaking down everything to do with build to rent communities, how it relates to investing, how the deals are structured, everything you need to know about build to rent. I'm going to be walking you through in this video because, like I said, I've seen some massive growth over the past number of years. So when we just look at the numbers, let me break this down for you. Since 2019, we have seen an increase of 307% in terms of units completed. That is massive, massive over the past couple of years. So before I get into the nitty-gritty details, I just want to take a quick bird's eye view of exactly what build to rent is and the landscape of rental units across the USA. So right now, if we're looking at residential homes, so this is regular houses that people rent out. And this is actually what I started in real estate investing when I was first getting into it. You know, you do a duplex conversion, you buy a house, you rent it out, that type of stuff. Right now in the USA, there are about 16.5 million rental homes. And of course, I'm talking about single family home rentals, like that type of thing. Single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, 16.5 million. But when we look at the overall rental market, and this is including multifamily, like apartment buildings, the stuff that we do at CPI. When we look at all of that, we only have about 35%, only 35% of the market is that single family homes. Everything else is apartment buildings, purpose-built apartments, all of that. So to understand why build to rent, BTR, has seen such a big increase, we have to look at the landscape and what build to rent actually is. Because think of it this way, if 35% of the market is your standard houses, you know, you've got mom and dad buy the house, they'll own a couple houses, they'll rent them off, they'll pay down the mortgage. That's the type of rentals we're talking about when we're looking at single family homes. But if 35% of the overall rental unit market is those single family homes, there's a lot of inefficiency there. The reason is the whole way of renting single family homes is incredibly inefficient. You know, when I was doing it, you have to manage multiple properties all over the place. Most people do all of the work themselves. You have to qualify for a residential mortgage. So most people, they want to buy a rental property, they'll rent out some type of house, they'll buy a house, they'll put a tenant in. Number one, it's challenging to get to cash flow in major metro markets, so it's going to be negatively geared. Number two, you have to qualify for residential financing. So you as a buyer have to qualify with your own income. The bank doesn't really care about the rental money given off by that asset. And then oftentimes management is a pain in the butt. And that's why when we look at management costs for single family homes, you're in that 10, 12% range of your gross rent that's coming in, your revenue, because it's such a pain in the butt because you got to travel to so many different areas to service your portfolio. So let me break it down this way. Let's say I own 5 to 10 rental properties in any given city. Well, I may have one over here. I may have one over here because we're single family homes. So you may have a duplex, but that's just 2 tenants. And you got to drive all over the place. And this is why property management is, 10 to 12% for single family homes, because it's a pain in the butt. You got to go all over. If you have a larger portfolio, think of, let's say 100 houses. You have 100 different tax bills. You got to deal with property tax, 100 different properties. You got 100 different roofs or roofs, depending on which side of the country you're on, all over the place. It's incredibly inefficient. And that's why for the longest time with apartment buildings, instead of having 100 different houses spread out all over the place, it's far more efficient, far more effective to have one single apartment building with 100 units in it. Management costs significantly lower. You're probably 3 to 4% in terms of your management fees, significantly lower. You probably have on-site staff that's there all the time to help with your tenants because everybody's concentrated in one spot. The financing is way, way better because now you're into commercial financing and the banks love multifamily. You've got one roof or maybe 8 if you've got different if you're garden style. It's just incredibly more efficient to buy a single consolidated massive units than have all of these units spread out all over the map. And again, that's how I started out in the single family space. So you're probably wondering, well, Seth, how does build to rent come into play here? Because I've talked about single family home rentals and how it's incredibly inefficient, and you've got a lot of mom and pops involved in that space. Now I've talked about how apartment buildings are more efficient. That's why a lot of people gravitate to it because the cash flow is stronger, you get way better financing. Like there's all of these reasons why you would want to get into apartment buildings. And that's why with CPI, we do a lot of apartment buildings. That's what we do. But how does build to rent factor in? Because there is a space in the marketplace that's growing and there's a lot of interest in terms of build to rent. So let me explain why. So when we look at the greater, single family home rental space, about 1.5%, 1.5% of those units are build to rent, BTR, but there's a lot of money being pumped in. So let me explain what build to rent actually is. So build to rent, think of it this way. You remember all of those houses spread out all over the map that I had before? It's the same thing. So you've got a whole bunch of houses, but instead of being spread out all over the city, you are purposely building an entire community strictly for the purpose of renting it out. That's what you're doing. So if this is our map here, we'll have some roads coming through all over this community. We've got houses. We could have 100 units. We could have 200 units. We could have 500 units. But the entire community is built from the ground up strictly to rent out. Because typically when we're doing apartment buildings, we use what's called the value add strategy. So this is where we're acquiring an already built, already constructed apartment building. We're finding inefficiencies in the building, either physical renovations we can do to drive the value, or operational improvements. So we can raise the rent, we can replace staff, we can do all sorts of things on the operation side. And together we can pull those two value levers to increase the value of the asset. That's how we make money in apartment buildings. But with built to rent, you're starting from scratch. You're building it from the ground up. Now, when you're building something for the ground up, especially for rentals, you're going to do things differently than you are for buying a regular single family home. So apartment buildings, they're built to rent. When we acquire with CPI, when we acquire an apartment building, we're looking for those two value levers. But when somebody built the apartment building, they knew they were building an apartment building to rent out. But with single family homes, it's a little bit different because everybody's building homes for families to purchase and to move into. And so when you're building for the end user, the home buyer, you're going to make some design changes. You're going to add different features in the home that are different than if you were building that home strictly to rent out. I guess when you have rentals, a lot of single family home rentals, you want a lot of stuff to be exactly the same. Because when you have multiple units, let's say your toilets or your sinks or the layout, it makes it really easy to buy a whole bulk load of tile for repairs or for renovations than to have to, physically go to each unit, measure everything out because every house is different. And that's the advantage of building a build-to-rent community from scratch, because you can standardize everything. You can have 3 different models that will rent out because you base them off of comparables in the marketplace. You know exactly what you're going to get for rent. You know exactly how you're going to build it. And you can add things in specific for renters. So you're going to choose different materials to make sure it's durable. You're going to make sure that you have limited models, different variations, to make it easy for retrofits or to make it easy for repairs. This is why build-to-rent is much more efficient. Now, I mentioned mom and pops. It's a very, very fragmented market with the typical single family home rental space. And that's 35% of the market. 1.5% of those are build to rent communities. What's the big difference here? Well, number one, I said, we're able to control the type of asset. So rather than purchasing a home that a family wants to move into and it's built for them, we can actually purposely build homes and properties for specific to rentals, and we control everything, right? We know exactly what the tenants are looking for. We know exactly the materials we need. We know the exact layout that's going to maximize the rent that's going to be returned. We engineer the whole project because we're starting from the ground up. Now, remember how I said that having multiple houses all over a city or a state or a country, it's a pain in the butt. Trust me, it's a pain in the butt. But remember with the apartment building, how everything was consolidated under one roof and we had 100 units in one building or on one property? Well, with built to rent, we're basically taking the advantages of consolidation with the apartment building and then merging them with some of the advantages of renting out single family homes. So let me walk through a couple of the advantages of single family homes. On average, the occupancy is higher with single family homes than it is with apartment buildings. Because if you have a family, a lot of people want to feel like they own a home, like they're living in a regular home. You got the white picket fence if you choose to have the white picket fence. So on average, we have a 97% occupancy rate with build to rent. Why? Just for all of the reasons I just explained. It's a house. People feel like it's theirs. Even though they're renting, it's a house. And an apartment building, some people love condos, right? There's always going to be a market for condos. But you know what? You've got 2.5 kids, like the average person, you've got 2.5 kids, you've got the dog. You want to live in a home. You want to have that front yard. You want to have that backyard, right? You don't get that with the apartment building. It's a lifestyle change or it's a lifestyle choice. But with build to rent, you're actually taking advantage of the higher occupancy rates that single family home rentals provide, but also taking advantage of the efficiencies of multifamily and apartment buildings. Because a build to rent community Everything is on one property. You can have 100, 200, 500 homes in one community that's purposely built strictly to rent it out. So it's the best of both worlds, you could say. On one side, you get increased occupancy, you get tenants that are going to stay longer, they don't turn as much, and that's going to decrease your turn time and the expenses and the cost of having vacant units that are switching over, because families tend to stay longer. You're going to have increased occupancy because this is where people want to live, but also you get the efficiency of having all of your houses in one spot, plus with the addition of having houses that you have specifically built to rent. So you have designed them to maximize the rent you are going to get to extract out of that market because you built it specifically for that tenant in mind. You don't have to retrofit or change a house that was built for the end user, a home buyer, which is going to be different than somebody looking to rent a home, if that makes sense. So we're combining both. So when we're looking at build to rent and the advantages of it, and with CPI, we're always looking at build to rent opportunities because we are very, very experienced on the multifamily side, the apartment building side. We know what that's like. Now, when we're looking at a build to rent community, basically it's the same thing. The only difference is instead of having, let's say, 8 buildings on a property with all of the apartments on it, we have 100 homes on one spot. Now, when I mentioned financing and the advantages of apartment building financing, right? There's so many advantages of that commercial financing with apartment buildings. Well, guess what? The banks, they actually look at build to rent communities just like an apartment building. So we still get all of the benefits of financing an apartment building with build to rent. So think of it this way. With a build to rent community, it's a bunch of houses, but it's treated by the lender as an apartment building, which is great. And when we're looking at management, and the costs associated with that, instead of having management costs like a single family home, 10 to 12% because it's all over the place, it's very inefficient. With a build to rent community, you got 100 units in one spot. It acts just like an apartment building. You have your property manager, you have your on-site staff, you can even have your leasing office. Everything is the same as an apartment building, except it's spread out over that community rather than just one building if you're doing high rise, or across multiple buildings if you're doing low rise or garden style. So the key thing to understand here is we've got the advantages of people staying longer, increased occupancy, people paying more because it's a home. It feels like a home. It looks like a home. You got the yards, but also we take advantage of all of the benefits and the efficiencies of the financing side, of the management side, like everything's in one place. And this is why since 2019, we've seen a 307% increase in the number of units completed. So going back to the business case and why I feel you should be looking at build to rent, if you're growing your portfolio, you just want to look at market inefficiencies, right? So remember how I said 35% of the market is that single family home, and we got 16.5 million units here, and this 35%. Very, very inefficient. And so when we look at fragmentation of a market, you've got so many different owners. Because how many people own 1 or 2 homes as rental properties? A lot. And that's a lot of the 16.5 million. But we can basically, with build to rent, we can take all of the benefits, remove the inefficiencies, and now that's going to increase the money we're making, the return we're receiving, right? There's so much opportunity in the build to rent space, and that's why you see massive, Blackstone, all of these huge companies, they're pumping billions of dollars into building these communities. You're going into a marketplace where the demand is there. You have comparable properties. You know the demand. We look at, and with CPI, when we're entering a new market, we do a lot of research about the market. We're looking for very specific drivers in that marketplace to make sure we're allocating and placing our capital in the right spot. Because not only do we want the deal to do well, we want the surrounding market to do well to help pump up that deal and add that extra win behind the sales. That's what we're looking for. Our acquisition team does a lot of work on the ground when we're researching new markets. But with build to rent, the same thing applies. You're looking at the marketplace. You're looking at comparables. You're looking at policy, GDP growth, job growth, right? What's the influx of people in migration? All of these things come into play. But now, rather than purchasing an apartment building that's already in place, that's purpose built for rentals, we're going to build a community to our spec, to what the tenants really want, to maximize the rent we can achieve in that marketplace. And now we just manage it just like we would an apartment building. And this is why build to rent gets so much attention and gets so much interest, because it really is the merging of two worlds. You're merging the single family space with the increased occupancy, the feeling of being in a home, right? But we get a lot of inefficiency. But then you're merging it with the efficiency of having all of your units in one place,
better management, better terms in terms of debt and how you're structuring the financing. You merge them together, and that's why we have build to rent. And there's such a big market going on for build to rent. So if you're interested in learning more about build to rent, if you're interested in learning more about multifamily, whether it's passively investing in these opportunities, whether it's actively investing in these opportunities, you can go to sethferguson.org/invest, sethferguson.org/invest. Check it out. You can book a call with me or my team, and we can definitely help you out with anything you need in that space. Okay, so I hope this was helpful in terms of build to rent. Keep an eye on this because we're going to see a huge shift in terms of that single family, that 35%, and it's going to gravitate more and more and more towards build to rent communities. Okay, hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you next week.